Hello and welcome to our 2025 annual predictions. My name is Paul Nashawaty and I am the practice lead for the app dev practice. I'm here with Jackie. Jackie, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, Jackie McGuire, practice lead and principal analyst for our security research. And yeah, I guess that I don't know that there's anything else people need to know about me.
That's great, Jackie. Well, I'm glad that you're here. I mean, we're talking about the top five areas and app dev and predictions, what we see and the impacts of security. It's incredibly important because as organizations are moving faster and things and code is getting delivered and pushed into the market much faster, security is a huge impact, right? And I think if we just kind of jump right into it, Jackie, when we look at AI augmentation and development initiatives, this is where I see a lot of organizations in 2025 are going to look to achieve scale. We
Yeah.
see that a lot of organizations are, looking at replacing their developers. Actually, we see 50% of organizations are replacing the developers with AI-driven systems, and we predict that they will fail. And the reason why is they're going to look at AI-powered tools to increasingly assist developers by automating those repetitive tasks like code generation, maybe debugging, maybe testing. But these systems need to also have a human in the loop, especially now. I don't think AI is ready to fully take it over. And I certainly think that there's impacts for problem solvings and innovation and collaboration, but that really does require that human interaction there. And security plays a big part. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that sometimes this is misinterpreted. So I think when we say we're going to replace 50% of developers with AI, that's not necessarily saying if you have 100 developers right now, you'll have 50 and the other 50 they will completely not be doing their jobs. I think it's more that 50% of the work that developers are doing right now will eventually be replaced by AI. And I think a lot of this comes down to a lack of understanding of the difference between better and faster. And so AI can do a lot of very binary black and white things that have to do with code faster, right? AI can transform things from plain text into JSON. It can, look for missing variables. It can do a lot of the things that slow you down as a developer. It can comb through Stack Overflow for you so you don't spend 3 hours trying to find a solution. But to your point, it can't read all of the answers on a problem in Stack Overflow and really intelligently differentiate between this person sounds like they know what they're talking about. This person sounds like they probably don't. This solution kind of looks like it fits, but how can I tweak a couple things? And AI is getting better at that, but we're still not at a place where it's going to be able to make those really fine-tuned kind of human decisions that have a lot to do with instinct and judgment, right? And like judgment of other humans, which is not something that AI is super great at an efficient place right now. So there are frontier models that can do it, but the amount of compute and training those require is not at a place where that's going to be cost effective for the enterprise.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's about those tools that organizations use. It's about the different areas, and of course, you want to optimize and get the most efficiencies out of those tools. And using AI as a tool to manage those tools is also important. But again, the human in the loop is a big factor. I think that kind of leads to our next prediction here, Jackie, which is I think it kind of ties to the consolidation of those DevOps tooling into platforms, right? And what we see is, I'm looking at the research here and what we did from our early studies, we see that by the end of 2025, that 50% of enterprises will really start to abandon the management of individual best-of-breed DevOps tools in favor of a unified platform. And that really is to focus on the reduction of operational complexities, streamlining workflows, and improve the integration, allowing for organizations to really help deliver cycles without increasing that overhead. It also ties into what you were talking about, Jackie, which is the multiple tools, the multiple platforms, and having AI look at all of these different tools really is overhead, right? And in order to have that streamlined, organizations are looking at that unified platform. What are the impacts to security around unifying a platform and of course across the CI/CD pipeline and the DevOps tools?
Yeah, I think there's a number of them. A platform is great, right? It's wonderful to have all your tools united in one place. But that when you have a platform, that goes back to you really have to have your role-based access control, your identity and access management dialed in. I think anybody in security has been in an incident response where, a third party, a vendor, or someone in your enterprise says, well, we had all these blanket permissions across the platform because a bunch of different people needed access to stuff. And as we were ramping up in this platform, nobody really was responsible for fine tuning those. So I think platforms are great, but we've seen a number of software supply chain vulnerabilities where one platform can bring down the whole world or stop all air traffic for a day and a half. So, yeah, I mean, it's the classic catch 22 between how do I get everything in one place and how do I make sure that everything in one place doesn't become an absolute gold mine for attackers. So I think what you also then need to keep in mind is that you may create a volume problem with a platform. So what I've seen a lot of times happen is, companies will roll out a security platform, turn everything on, and then all of a sudden you're like, wow, our log volume just quadrupled. And then you instead of tuning those logs, because everybody's kind of fighting fires, people just start shutting them off, right? So using a platform is the same as using a whole smorgasbord of individual tools, which it comes down to you still need experts, you still need really fine-grained identity and access management and role-based access control, and you need to be more aware of the fact that you now have kind of a critical linchpin in your entire system. And I think using one platform really requires robust resiliency planning because losing that one platform has a much larger impact than losing any single tool in a distributed stack.
Yeah, Jackie, I think you're spot on, and I think there's a balance between reducing complexity but increasing security and having that robust platform, like you were talking about. You don't want that one platform to get shut down. And I really like the fact that where we work together as analysts, right? It's kind of that 1+1 = 3 scenario where you have like I focus on that day zero, day one, day two, and the DevSecOps piece, but the DevSecOps piece that kind of overlays into the CI/CD pipeline and the SDLC. I really don't get into the deep security elements like you're talking about, and I think that that's a big factor, especially across the SDLC. Which will also lead into the third prediction that we have, right? Which is focusing developers who are spending their time focusing on productivity challenges. And what we see in our research is developers will continue to report that they only spend about 24% of their time writing code. And the majority of their time are spent on ancillary tasks like designing, testing, debugging, and stakeholder meetings, right? So they're spending a lot of their time on areas that they're not writing code. So what we're seeing is, this is where you have all these different pipelines, right, across the SDLC, and security being a major factor. I see on the CI/CD pipeline side that organizations are driving towards adopting automation and AI for non-coding activities, right? They're really trying to shift the balance back towards innovation and the value creation. But there's definitely an impact to the security pipeline in the software development lifecycle. What are your thoughts?
I have a really terrible analogy, but it's kind of like when McDonald's started expanding rapidly, right? So AI is really good because so as a data scientist, I joined a security company and I had been a little bit of a computer nerd as a teenager, but had never directly worked in security. And so I was like, oh, I'm gonna write so much code the first couple months. I'm gonna catch all these hackers. Now, I spent 3 weeks with a text file of syslog just trying to regex it into a JSON that I could actually do something with, right? Spent weeks beating my face against Kibana, just trying to pull the right logs to do something with. So I'm excited about this because I don't want to spend my time doing that stuff. And it was what made being a data scientist really fatiguing. And there was lots of burnout is that I didn't spend the core of my day doing what really made me happy. And as a neurospicy person, I need to see results. I need tangible stuff coming out of my productivity. So the reason I talk about McDonald's, right, is that was it great that now you could have the same kind of food all over the country? You always knew what to expect and you only needed $1 or $2 to eat. Yes, that's great. But if we don't look at the source, what's actually going into that food, and I know McDonald's is trying to do better at their supply chain, but all you end up with is exponentially increasing what could be small problems that turn into very large problems. So in the enterprise, we really don't do a good job at controlling the creation of data or the replication of existing data, masquerading as new data. And this is really going to increase exponentially. So I think we've spent a long time thinking, we can just keep people away from the types of data they're not supposed to touch, and that'll keep them from doing anything with it that could be dangerous. And that's just not a reality, right? So we have all these models that are ingesting data, spitting it out. Things are being copied and pasted in Slack and email and everywhere to other people. We really need to go back to we need to train everybody in an enterprise who touches an endpoint or customer or corporate data, how that data is classified, how it should be handled. We need to stop making that a problem that software solves after the fact and start making it a people problem that we solve on the way in. And then I come from the finance industry. I spent a little over 15 years as a financial advisor and registered investment advisor. So I go back to compliance and governance because everybody hates it, but we now have created this massive security problem across the entire organization. Everybody in your organization is using AI for everything. How do you control that data, right? So like, how do we put governance in place? How do we put compliance in place? Last week, we were talking about DORA, the Digital Operations and Resiliency Act for the EU. And so those types of things, these different regulations that are being passed, become this kind of like complicated picture. So I think we're going to have to start untying a lot of that. And if you're expecting your security people to spend 80% of their time on data identification, classification, and untangling, you're going to lose your whole security team because it sucks. That stuff sucks. Nobody wants to do that full time. So we need to start solving some of this at the root and then not expecting teams who are not happy to do that work to do that work.
It makes sense. Burnout is a real thing, but I do think it does tie into our fourth prediction though, because you were talking about data explosion and, like how things are, but like I view it as what's old is new, right? I mean, like we were calling things data lakes before and we were calling things big data and all this right now, though all that is just an LLM and, with some intelligence on it and some such, but at the end of the day, I mean, I think our fourth prediction here that we're kind of drilling down, which is, again, near and dear to this conversation because it is a very important part of app dev and app dev development, is secure and DevOps will be a non-negotiable part of the DevOps practices. What we see in research is as supply chains and zero vulnerabilities increase, over 60% of organizations are going to embed DevOps practices as a fundamental requirement moving forward for their organization. This will include embedding like DevSecOps practices as that fundamental requirement. It'll also include automating vulnerability scanning, continuous compliance monitoring, security training, embedded into the CI/CD pipeline to protect those applications and infrastructure. Aligns to what you were saying, Jackie, right? And I think that there's a lot there that, when we talk about training, we talk about the security elements, we talk about, the delivery process. How do you balance that burnout of going through all of the code? Like, for example, in the same study, we're looking at 24% of respondents indicated they want to release code on an hourly basis, yet only 8% can do so, right? So if organizations are releasing code on an hourly basis, you have to slow down to go faster, right? You have to have those security pieces in place. Otherwise, you just put yourself completely at risk. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's, this all goes back to that kind of cultural shift. So a lot of organizations I've worked in, there was a very adversarial relationship between engineering and development and security. They saw security as the bad guys, the people who said no all the time. I actually had a CEO one time tell me that security is an impediment to innovation. So that culture needs to shift quite a bit, right? And then here's the thing is that data scientists, we are not trained to write secure code. My first CEO came from Mandiant, and as a data scientist, and when I handed him my first model, he was like, code injection, code, like literally just pointing out that my code looked like Swiss cheese from a security perspective, because it was just not something that was emphasized in data science, because we were expected to hand our models off to other people, but I was in a 7-person startup. So I think there's a number of things. One is that threat monitoring and detection is going to need to become a continuous process. So if you're releasing code hourly, that all needs to be processed. And then I think there's actually kind of a shadow layer under here that is, where is that being processed? Because one of the things I don't know that everybody realizes about these cute little AI co-pilots is, yes, they help you write more secure code. Where are they processing the AI? The vast majority of the time, that data is being taken, extracted to a cloud that's outside of your organization for that tool, processed, and then sent back to you. And so that's another thing from a supply chain perspective, we're going to really have to start getting under control, because there are so many tools proliferating through the organization. Some of them are paid, some of them are free. We have no way to formalize the data privacy policies and management policies with them. So I think this whole ball of wax where everybody's going to need to learn security going forward. I think it used to be this is a specialty. It's just not the case anymore. We all need to learn security. And then we really, really have to do a lot of work to shift the cultural mindset. And that's not just how we talk about security. It's also how we handle incidents. Because it's one thing to say like, oh, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to point things out. It's a whole different thing if half of a team gets axed because of a security problem versus saying, well, here are the underlying issues and we can so I think you have to walk the walk, right? Like a lot of companies talk about security, a lot of companies talk about collaboration, but you really, really have to walk the walk and demonstrate that when people do the right thing, they don't lose their jobs.
Yeah, Jackie, look, I mean, this is very true. I mean, everything you mentioned, I'm going to kind of paraphrase and say a little bit different from a different perspective, because I think it absolutely ties into the next kind of the final prediction that we wanted to talk about today, which is, as organizations are trying to push code out the door faster, as these applications are being developed, you are spot on. You have to have governance and compliance and regulations in place. What we're seeing for the last prediction is low code and no code expansion will really transform roles. And we're seeing the adoption of low code and no code will grow over 30%, empowering the citizen developers to take on the more routine application development tasks. Like if you're going to do that, though, that means your organization needs to have those bumpers or guardrails in place in order to release code appropriately. If you're going to put in, enable your business analysts to create their own code, they have to be able to derive their code appropriately without increasing or introducing security issues. And this will also elevate the role of the developer, the professional developer, to focus on governance and also focus on those complex integrations as well as advanced configurations and customizations. So I think that there's a lot there. I think, Jackie, to your point, as organizations are expanding more into their, the quote citizen developer to start developing applications and not leave it up to the professional developer, there has to be guardrails. What are your thoughts?
If XCUtils doesn't ring a bell, so this is when we start to talk about supply chain. And also because in these low code and no code, a lot of these AI code enabled tools, unless you as a customer are going to go through actually quizzing them on what are the specific databases you use, how do you pull these things, there are a lot of ways to introduce vulnerabilities into an organization with low code and no code tools. And so there's a few. One is like XCUtils, right? It was a vulnerability in an open source package where someone kind of lingered for a really long time before introducing this vulnerability. Those things, if you don't have something that's looking a couple abstraction layers deep into these low and no code tools, those could introduce significant vulnerabilities. The other issue here is intellectual property. So this becomes really interesting if somebody posts a snippet of code to a GitHub, a Stack Overflow, any one of those repositories, and I take it and it turns out that's actually protected. There's not really a great way to know. And then on the flip side, if your employees are using low and no code tools and they're putting proprietary data in them, there's also really not a great way to prevent that from becoming training data and having your intellectual property actually leave the organization. So this creates a whole bunch of issues. So everything from governance, like you talked about, shadow IT is basically what I was talking about with this, like you actually don't really know who built that underlying software development stack, because it wasn't you and it wasn't your organization. And then, completely redefining the role of professional developers, how they interact with these tools, what part they play in the process and actually reviewing low and no code things. It's a really hard thing to say. And then I think there's also like life cycle management for applications, for data, for all of these different things. If you have a bunch of, say, like marketing people who are using no code email automate, do people still check email? What's a better thing? Social media automation. Do they know how long they're allowed to hold some of that data? Do they know how often they're required to examine that app and update it and things like that? And, I think low and no code are phenomenal applications for AI, because the creative and human side of these things is really what leads to innovation. However, low technical hurdles for these things may also introduce additional risks if lower technically aware people are using things that could potentially introduce security risks. So it all has to go back to training, and that, like, just because you're not writing code doesn't mean you don't need to know how to spot security issues. So everybody, I think enablement as we know it is going to fundamentally change. And if people lost their minds because we started teaching Common Core in schools, which has my kids doing calculus in 8th grade, how do you think they're going to feel if we start teaching cybersecurity? But that's where we're at, right? 10-year-olds should be learning what PII is and why you shouldn't put it on the internet.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Training is a big part of enablement for organizations to be successful. There's certainly no area here where we're slowing down, right? We're only going to go faster. And if we don't put those guardrails in place, then organizations are going to be at risk. And, that's a big factor here. And Jackie, I appreciate your time today. This has been great. There's a lot of insights here to share, a lot that, I'm looking forward to seeing your research this year on, and what we're putting out around the security front. It aligns nicely to the app dev side. So I definitely work hand in hand. Looking forward to being on calls and briefings with you, and appreciate your insights to this call here today. I also want to thank the audience for attending. There's just so much to talk about here, and Jackie and I are more than happy to have those conversations with you. So feel free to reach out and continue the discussion with us. I want to thank you for your time and appreciate you watching our session today. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks.